Hello everyone, hope you are doing good. So continuing from where we left last time, let's look into the requirements of ISO 13485 medical device quality management system, what it is and how it is important for a medical device organization. Today's agenda, we'll focus on understanding quality management system. We spoke about this fairly in our last session. We'll try to look into it again. We'll look into the different key principle of quality management system. What are those principles based on which a quality management system is defined? Then we'll dive into 13485, the standard, what it requires, overview of ISO 13485. And then in the end, we'll look into the advantages of having an ISO 13485 implemented in your organization. So from a quality management system perspective, what is a quality management system? Quality management system essentially is a set of processes that you define to ensure that your organization is driven based on a process-driven approach and not people-driven approach. These set of processes are defined keeping the organization's role and the functions that it carries out. What is ISO? ISO is basically an international organization for standardization. It is a worldwide body headquartered in Geneva. It is the organization which develops different standards. ISO 13485 is one such standard that the organization has developed for us. 13485 is an offshoot of 9001. You might be aware of 9001. It is a standard which is mainly focused on medical devices. Any organization that is developing any kind of medical device, may it be general medical device or in vitro diagnostic device or even software as a medical device, needs to show their compliance to ISO 13485, adopting the necessary requirements of ISO 13485 and implementing them in their organization. The standard can be implemented by the organization for their design, development, production, installation, and servicing activities. This is again dependent on what are the different activities the organization carries out. There might be a case where there is no installation and servicing needed. In such a scenario, those requirements from ISO 13485 are not applicable. The organization needs to say that and also give a justification as why it is not applicable. The standard can be used by internal and external parties, including certification and regulatory bodies, to ensure that the required expectations are met from a regulatory requirement perspective and also from a certification perspective. It's a standalone standard. What it means is that it is a standard against which an organization can claim their certification and comply and get the certification against 13485 and show the compliance against 13485. Looking at the key principle against which the ISO standard is developed. So there are 7 key principles that you see on the screen. It starts with customer focus. Any quality management system is developed keeping the customer's requirements in mind. That's the most important to begin with. Leadership. For any quality management system to be successfully implemented, the overall leadership or the management needs to be involved. Engagement of people. All the processes that we develop shall be developed keeping our team in mind. It should not be people driven. It should be process driven, but keeping the different functions or different workforce that we might have in the organization in mind, and the process shall be developed in such a way that it can be implemented by the workforce. Process approach, as we were talking before, the overall aspect is to drive the organization on the basis of a process driven approach rather than people driven approach. Continual improvement. The principle of continual improvement is very important because what it does is it gives you a step kind of an improvement where you improvise, you stabilize, you improvise, you stabilize. So it's like a step that you build, right? Rather than being a ramp, right? So it is not a continuous improvement. We focus on continual improvement. Continual improvement also helps you to follow the principle of stabilization. So for example, if you have developed a process, you implement the process, you see whether the process is getting stabilized, then you find more improvements, you further improve the process, that kind of an approach. Evidence-based decision making, very, very important. Any decision that are being made in terms of improvements or implementation of new processes shall be based on facts, shall be based on hardcore data that is supporting the need instead of an ad hoc approach. And in the end, relationship management, we need to ensure that all our relationship, including the ones which we might be having with our suppliers, are properly managed in terms of the controls that we put in place, the mutually beneficial equation that we might be having. The reason for that is very simple, is because, for example, if the suppliers change anything without notifying you, it might impact your final output of your product, and you want to avoid that. So from that perspective, relationship management becomes very important from an overall medical device development perspective. ISO 13485, this topic is pretty large. In today's session, I'm going to try and give you a very brief introduction of what it is all about, what are the different key aspects of ISO 13485. So there are 5 key clauses, because these are the 5 clauses on the basis of which any organization will define the different applicable processes with respect to 13485. What are these clauses? It is related to quality management system requirements. We will look into all of these in detail in the subsequent slides. Management responsibility, resource management, product realization, and in the end, measurement, analysis, and improvement. You will see in the following slides that whatever we saw in the previous slide about key principles of quality management system, each and every principle that you see on the slide right now is in one way or the other linked to all the subsequent slides or all the requirements of 13485 that I just highlighted in this slide, right? It's on the basis of the 7 core principle that the quality management system requirements are developed, and accordingly the requirements are defined. Let's start with quality management system requirements. For any organization, it is very important firstly to understand what is the role of an organization. Is it a manufacturer, is it a designer, or is it a distributor? Based on the role that the organization has defined for themselves, relevant processes shall be identified. All the processes shall be implemented keeping a risk-based approach in mind. What is a risk-based approach? A risk-based approach is basically, in a way, a feedback approach, wherein you kind of prioritize things which are of higher priority. You fix those first, and then the ones which are of lower priority. For example, if you get a customer complaint, if the customer complaint is something which can impact the life of a patient, then that becomes the highest priority. That is the highest risk. And you want to fix that first versus a customer complaint which is related only to minor training requirement or not understanding of a training material. So from that perspective, a risk-based approach shall be implemented in all the process that we define in our organization. All the changes that we make to these processes, so over a period of time, the processes will be changing. As we learn more, as we understand more, as we get more feedback, our processes that we develop will undergo iteration, will undergo improvements. These changes shall be made in a controlled manner. When we make these changes, we need to ensure that we keep in mind that due to the change that we make, we are not impacting any other requirements such as regulatory requirements. Different documentation in terms of processes that are applicable for the organization shall be defined. Their hierarchies shall be defined. A typical hierarchy model is what you see on the screen, where on the top of the pyramid sits the policy. Different policies, including the quality policy that you might have in your organization, which is a must for any ISO 13485 certified company. To define a quality policy will sit on top, followed by the quality manual, your procedures, work instructions, and in the end, you'll see the records and forms in the base of the pyramid. This understanding of this pyramid is very important because that defines the overall structure of your processes and what kind of controls you have implemented for those documentations. From a quality management system general requirement perspective, there are 3 key requirements that we need to fulfill. One is maintaining a medical device file. For every product that your organization might be developing or designing, we are expected to maintain a medical device file. A medical device file is imagine it to be a document which covers, or a folder which has all the relevant information for that particular device, which includes right from the intended use of the device, the labeling and packing of the device, the design specifications of the device, any installation or servicing that is needed for the device, things like that. So there are a set of requirements that needs to be captured in the medical device file, and for every device, the medical device file needs to be maintained. Control of documents. In control of documents, what we need to ensure is we have a right process in place. We have the right tool through which we are managing our quality management system. The tool shall be validated. And how we will manage these documents, how we'll manage these processes, how will we identify the documents, how will we ensure that the right documents are available to the right people, how will we ensure that when a particular process undergoes a revision change, the previous version, which is the obsolete version, is restricted to people from using. How do you keep these controls in place is what you will define as part of your overall document control process. The retention period of document is also very important. The retention period changes from country to country, from regulatory requirement to regulatory requirement, even from this standard to what you might be seeing for your European requirements to FDA requirements might be different. So retention period shall be something which you need to keep updating based on as you grow in different geographies. Control of records, similar to documents, we will be having a lot of records which basically are evidence to say that a particular processes have been implemented. The way you show a process has been implemented is by maintaining the records. And the most important thing is we need to ensure that the records are safely maintained. They are retrievable. They're available when needed. Never ever backdate records as a good practice. Don't ever do that. Ensure that if there are any health related confidential information in some of the records that you might be maintaining, either it is a digital record or it's a physical copy. If you have conducted any clinical investigation and if there is any confidential health information, then the onus is on you to ensure that that information is kept secured such that it does not get leaked to where it is not supposed to. So what we discussed before were all general requirements in terms of setting up processes, documentation needed, defining the role of the organization, maintaining medical device file. Now let's see what is the requirement from a management perspective. What are the different management responsibilities that we need to focus on? So it starts with management's commitment, and rightly so, because if the management of the organization is not committed towards the requirement of quality management system, then how are we going to implement that system in the organization? So it starts with the commitment. Management shall demonstrate that commitment. It does not have to be something that you need to document as a process, but in general, in terms of the policies that have been set up, in terms of the message that the management gives to the overall organization, they need to show their commitment towards the requirements of quality management system. Customer focus, as I was mentioning before, everything that we do as part of ISO 13485 needs to start with keeping the requirements of customer in mind. All the relevant processes that we develop shall be developed, ensuring that in the end, we are going to enable meeting the requirements of our customer. Quality policy, very, very important. Management shall define a quality policy. Quality policy is something which is derived from the mission and vision of the organization. It is something that is expected to be communicated to the organization. Every individual, every member of the organization shall be aware of the quality policy, shall be linked to the quality policy, and ensure that all their actions are defined in their work and the actions that they are doing are defined to be in sync with the quality policy. Planning, the management shall define annual quality plans based on which different activities shall be carried out. Annual quality plans may include activities such as when to conduct an audit, how many audits to be conducted, when to have management review meetings as part of regulatory requirements. If certain processes needs to be updated and changed, when do we do that? What kind of trainings are to be deployed at what period in time? Things like that. These are few examples that I can share, which will be part of your overall planning activity. Responsibility, authority, and communication, very important. It is expected that the management defines the responsibility and authority of every individual, either it can be role-based or individual-based, and ensure that those are communicated to the individual such that they can then perform their tasks and their activities in the most efficient way possible. If that is not the case, then what happens is there might be confusion. People will not do their job properly, and if they don't do their job properly, what will happen in the end? You are impacting the final output that we are trying to get into the market. Keeping the fact that it is a medical device, it's very important that we try to maintain the consistency. Management reviews. So from the standards perspective, you might be doing this in your organization where you meet in a forum and we discuss different things. From the standards perspective, the standard has kind of given us bare minimum topics that we need to ensure that we discuss upon. The management has its vision and hold on. These topics include things like audit results, complaints, feedback, different improvements, any changes in the regulations, and so on. The management reviews are supposed to happen on a periodic basis. What should be the period shall be defined by the organization. It can be quarterly, it can be once in 6 months, or as found appropriate for the organization. The outputs of these meetings are supposed to be formally documented, and they should be focused on ensuring the effectiveness of the QMS is maintained. From the management review, we look into the requirements of resource management. Why is resource management important and what is it all about? So resource management typically is divided into 3 key areas. One is related to human resource, where we ensure that the people that we are recruiting or the people that we are identified to do certain job are the right people for doing that job. Again, if that is not the case, what will happen is they will not be able to do justice to their work, and that will impact the overall medical device that we try to build and bring to the market. Resource management, human resource also includes aspects of ensuring that we keep a tab on the skills and competence of people, and where needed, provide adequate training and ensure that the training that we have provided to them is effective. It should not be that we provide the training in a way that the person is not able to understand and the overall effectiveness of the training is not being monitored. It's very important to ensure that we monitor the effectiveness of the training such that the person is able to do their job in the right manner. From human resource, we then look into the next resource activity, which is the infrastructure. We need to ensure when we talk about infrastructure, we are looking at right from the workspace to the different tools to even the transportation that you might be using to ship your device from one place to another. All of this is something that we need to keep in control, keeping the overall development activities for the medical device. For example, if you are into the field of optics and you're developing something like an optical camera for imaging, say your retina, you need to ensure that the overall production facility is clean, even to the extent that you are doing it in a clean room. So your overall infrastructure shall be accordingly maintained and managed. If that is not the case, then what will happen is there might be some foreign particles that might be introduced as part of during your assembly process or during your production activity, and that may hamper or that may impact the final performance of the device. Similarly, when we talk about transportation or when we talk about even things like software that we might be using to design something, if those software are not of the right, if they're not of the right license and if they're not procured in the right way, then you might not get all the features and functions of the software, due to which you might not be able to do your job in the right way and may have a direct or indirect impact on medical device design and development. Similarly, on transport, many a times, especially in cases of IVDs, where there are reagents which are sensitive to temperature and it needs to be transported from one place to another, we ensure that the overall transporting mechanism is controlled by either putting ice packs or cold storage environment or any of those. And we also ensure that during the transportation, we have a mechanism to monitor the temperature, because many times if there is a slight fluctuation in the overall storage condition, it might have a huge impact on the final performance of the particular reagent. So keeping the product in mind, the required control shall be defined and the processes shall be defined for the infrastructure as well. Work environment and contamination control. The overall work environment shall be defined. Places where you need to have appropriate clothing. For example, when you're dealing with electronic components, you need to ensure that you are wearing ESD wrist straps or it is ESD proof. Similarly, on the contamination control, when the devices are coming from the field, many times when the devices come back from the field, rework, you need to ensure that they are disinfected before you can investigate them or look into it. From that perspective, work environment and contamination control is key, ensuring that the safety of the people involved is preserved. At the same time, the development activities are also defined in the right way. Let's look at the most important section of ISO 13488, which is the product realization. So product realization starts from your risk management process, which is as per 14971. We'll talk a lot about it in our next session. It then goes towards identifying customer. From there, it defines the requirement for the overall design and development to be conducted. From there, it goes towards understanding the procurement or purchasing related activity. From there, we move towards production, service installation, and then finally control of equipments involved in the overall production activity. So let's start with initial two, which is defining the risk management as part of planning of product realization, defining a risk management process. The risk management process for a medical device is defined as per ISO 14971. The basic of this process is to ensure that you have identified relevant risk and you have defined the mitigation for the same. Customer related processes are the ones where we interact with the customer, we understand their requirement and we ensure that their requirements can be fulfilled. In cases where the requirements can't be fulfilled, or in case a particular set of mandated requirements coming from the customer cannot be fulfilled by us, it is the obligation of the manufacturer to go back to the customer and ensure that it is being communicated and approvals have been sorted. We need to ensure that when we talk to the customers and we talk about meeting their requirements, the regulatory requirements are also kept in mind. For example, if you are talking to a customer who is in, let's say, US, and they wish to procure your device, but if you don't have the US FDA approval, then it is up to you to ensure you communicate that to the customer in the right fashion. From there, we then look into what are the different requirements for design and development. For any project, we typically start with planning of that project. Similarly, for design and development related activities, we start with what is called as design development plan. We ensure that we have the plan in place. We ensure that we understand the different design stages that will be involved in the overall activity, design and development activity. We ensure the right people are identified. We ensure the appropriate stakeholders are defined. The plan for every product that we might be developing shall be in place and updated as and when needed. Once the plan has been defined, we move towards implementation of the plan. So the next thing that comes into the picture is ensuring that we have the right requirements being defined for the device. The design and development inputs is where we collect those requirements. And when we are defining the requirements for a device, there are 5 to 6 key aspects that we want to keep in mind. One is the functional requirements. Second is performance requirement. Third is regulatory requirements. Fourth is quality requirement. Then comes safety requirements and usability requirements. The usability is something which has developed a lot over the last few years, and now it is a mandate for any medical device organization to ensure that their product is developed keeping the usability requirements also in mind. We need to ensure that when we are defining these requirements for the product, the requirements are unique and they are not of conflicting in nature. One requirement might say something, the other should not conflict that. From the requirements, multiple outputs might be generated. These outputs are part of your overall design files. These outputs may include things like bill of materials, your design drawing files, your PCB layouts, your source code itself, and all of these are supposed to be maintained as part of your design outputs. At every stage that you might have defined in your development plan, you need to ensure that post every stage, there is a formal review in place. As part of review, the relevant documents and the development activity shall be reviewed. If there are any action items or if there are any comments, that needs to be resolved and the review record needs to be maintained. Design and development verification and validation are two very important things. Verification focuses on meeting the requirements and it needs to be conducted at every stage in the development activity. Can be in iterations, can be done multiple times the overall development activities. Validation, on the other hand, is something that we do to ensure that the intended use of the device is being met. These are two very different activities because one is in sync with the requirements of the device, the other is in sync with the intended use of the device. Validation shall be done only on devices which are equivalent to the production version. On the other hand, verification can be done in an iterative way. You might have done one cycle of verification on a particular version of the device. You might run another iteration on the next version of the device. But the validation should be done at the stage where you say that, hey, you know what, I have done the verification and this is the version which is the final or the closest to production. And that's when you do your validation. It is ideally only after validation that a particular product can be commercialized. Post validation, we do something called as design transfer. The design transfer for a hardware device might be as simple as the meeting between the design team and the manufacturing team, where the relevant documents and the training is transferred from the design team to the manufacturing team so that they can go ahead and start bulk production. In terms of software, it might be a stage where once that software development is completed, you basically release the software into the market. Depending again on type of product, the transfer activity and the process shall be defined accordingly. Design changes. You cannot just randomly make changes to the design. As we were talking about process changes and control to the process, similarly, design changes and control to the design shall be implemented. At any point in time, if a design gets changed, relevant information needs to be appended. And most importantly, for any design change, verification shall be conducted. You may opt to not do validation if the changes are not significant in nature, but if that is the case, you need to justify the same. In the end, all the design file needs to be maintained as part of design and development files. And as and when there are improvements or as and when there are updates to these files, the same shall be maintained and kept as part of your design and development file. Once the design and development is completed, we are at a stage where now we will need procurement of raw materials. So before we start doing production, between design and development and production, there is a stage of purchase. Purchase is very important because it is at this stage we define controls for our suppliers. We ensure that we have identified the right suppliers who can meet our requirements. We ensure that these suppliers are regularly monitored based on their performance, and if any correction needed, the same shall be implemented. It is at this stage where we also ensure that whatever we procure as part of our raw materials, they are properly being inspected as part of your incoming inspection. You have the right processes defined, the right sampling plan in place, and the acceptance criteria as well. Once the raw material has been procured, they're being tested. Materials which are accepted are segregated from the ones which are not accepted. The ones which have not met your criteria, the same shall be communicated to your supplier, and as and when needed, a root cause analysis shall be conducted and documented. From purchasing, we move towards the actual production stage where we are now developing, where we are now producing the device. For us to do that, we need to ensure that we have the right work instructions in place. We need to ensure that we have the right tools in place. The tools shall be properly calibrated and maintained. We need to ensure that we have defined the process based on which how we are going to document the results of the manufacturing activity. We need to ensure that our labeling and packing are also defined and work instruction for the same are also being developed. As part of the production activity, the cleanliness of product is also very important. When we talk about cleanliness of product, there are 5 key aspects that we need to keep in mind in order to define the process for the same. Based on the 5 aspects, the ones which are applicable to you are the ones which you will incorporate. For example, there is a requirement to define process related to cleanliness of product, keeping the aspect of whether the product needs to be sterile before it is being shipped to the user, or it should be sterile after the user opens it and starts using it, or if the sterility activity is not involved, whether there is an aspect of the product being contaminated due to process agents. When you talk about process agents also include things like when you're doing soldering on a PCB board, it may lead to some soldering burrs, and those are also called as process agents. Keeping these 5 kind of pointers in mind, as based on the applicability of these pointers, you need to ensure that cleanliness of product and the processes needed to ensure that the product is clean are defined and being adhered to. Where applicable, if your product is something that needs installation, then you need to ensure that you have defined the installation process. You need to ensure that the process also defines how the installation activity will be captured as part of your installation report. What needs to be in the installation report needs to be defined, keeping the installation activities in mind. It is only when the installation report is being signed by your installation engineer and the customer, the installation is deemed to be completed and the product has been transferred to the customer. Servicing. Again, as dependent on the product and the kind of servicing elements involved, you need to define your servicing process. You need to ensure that these service requests are properly logged and maintained. Based on the service request, appropriate action shall be taken. Based on the actions that you take, it needs to be recorded and the actions shall be communicated to your customer as well. Let's say the product has been brought back for rework, then as part of your service report, what rework took place shall be documented and a copy of your service report should be shared with your customer. Requirements for sterile medical devices. If your device is something that needs to be maintained in sterile condition, then the requirement for the same shall be defined. The processes for the same shall be developed and adhered to. Validation of processes. All the different processes that might be involved in the production of your device shall be properly validated. And installation qualification, operational qualification, and performance qualification shall be conducted, and the relevant and right people shall be identified and trained in carrying out these processes. Validation of processes and production and service provision. All the different processes that are involved as part of your product development shall be validated. These processes shall be defined. Work instruction for these processes shall be maintained, and based on the work instruction, the process shall be validated. Any key process such as soldering or such as gluing that might be involved as part of your production activity, as part of your assembly activity, shall be defined, shall be recorded, and the validation report to ensure that these processes are doing what they are supposed to do. And when we run these processes, the final output that we get is what it is supposed to be, shall be maintained and documented. Cases where revalidation is needed, the criteria for revalidation shall also be defined, and at stages where acceptance criteria needs to be defined, that shall be captured as part of your overall validation protocol. Validation for sterile burial systems shall also be defined similarly, and special emphasis shall be given to them because these will be seen as special processes. Identification and traceability. At every stage of your overall development, the devices or the stage at which the device is shall be identified. These identifications are typically carried out by using different color tags to say that what stage the device is in. If it is a red tag, then it might be a device which is rejected. If it is a yellow tag, it might be something that needs to be tested. Or if it is a green tag, that might say that it is tested and it has been approved as per the acceptance criteria. The identification at every stage shall be defined, again, depending on what are the different processes your organization has defined and implemented. Traceability, again, is very important. We need to ensure that as part of your overall development aspect, the traceability element is being maintained. Different key components that might be going in the overall development of the device shall be traced, such that if there is any issues in the field, you can identify the relevant information, including the batch number or lot number that was used in making the particular device. Customer property. When we talk about customer property, it is not only about when we sell a device to the customer that becomes a customer property. There might be cases where your customer might give you certain tools or certain testing tools for you to implement and test the product using those tools. In such scenarios, it is your job as an organization to ensure that customer property is properly safeguarded, protected, and when the need of the customer property is completed, it is being transferred back to the customer. Preservation of product. At every stage, we need to ensure that the product is properly preserved. From the storage condition to transportation condition shall be defined, and if need be, those conditions shall be validated. Control of monitoring and measuring devices. This is nothing but to ensure that all the tools, relevant tools, software or hardware that you might be using as part of your production activity, as part of your overall assembly activity, are properly maintained. Where there is a need for calibration, they are properly calibrated and calibration records are being maintained. These tools shall be properly identified such that you can identify whether a tool is calibrated or out of calibration, and the ones which are out of calibration shall be segregated. The frequency in which you want to perform calibration shall also be recorded and maintained as part of your process. So once your product realization is completed, once you have developed the product, you have put it in the market, you have done the installation servicing, then comes the stage where you now measure the overall performance of the product, you analyze it, and then you also find ways to improve the product. So what are the different requirements in this section related to measurement, analysis, and improvement is what we can do it in further details. So it starts with feedback. Feedback can be sought in any different ways. It can be written, it can be oral, it can be direct, it can be indirect. There shall be a process in place to collect these feedback in a systematic way, to evaluate this feedback, to understand whether the feedback is towards improvisation or is actually a complaint. If it is a complaint, then complaint handling procedures shall be put in place. Complaints are basically when the product fails to meet certain requirements. If you have defined that the product will capture ECG, and if it is not able to capture the ECG of the patient, then basically it has failed to meet the requirement, and that constitutes towards complaint. It is very important for us to log these complaints, investigate the complaints, understand whether the complaints are of what nature. If the complaints are due to any adverse event, then the same shall be reported to the regulatory authorities. Necessary actions that we need to take to close a complaint shall be documented appropriately. If a particular complaint is not to be investigated, then the justification for the same shall be recorded and documented. As I was talking about reporting to regulatory authorities in the previous slide, there shall be a formal process in place where applicable changes or issues seen shall be reported to the regulatory authorities. As an organization, as part of continual improvement process, we need to define internal audits, frequency for internal audits. We need to ensure that these audits are conducted in an impartial way. Based on the audit outputs, appropriate corrective and preventive action shall be taken. Process and product performance shall be monitored using different processes in place. For example, process performance is monitored using taking help of internal audit. Product performance is monitored taking help of understanding the complaint trends and the feedback that we receive. The overall non-conformance related to product at different stage shall be documented, analyzed. The trends seen shall be, and based on that, appropriate corrective and preventive action shall be conducted. Non-conformance of product can be in different stages. For example, during your incoming inspection, during your production line, or even after the sales, you might see non-conformance to product. Post-sales non-conformance to product is nothing but complaints that you receive. It is very, very important that we drive our decision based on data, analysis of data from different sources, different types such as feedback, conformity of product requirements, performance of supplier, rejection ratios are all different type of data that we can look into. And based on what we find, based on the data analysis that we conduct, we make improvements to our existing process, or we define new processes. Finally, we talk about corrective and preventive action. Please keep in mind, corrective action is to eliminate the cause of non-conformity in order to prevent its reoccurrence. And preventive action is to eliminate the causes of potential non-conformity. Corrective and preventive action never exist together, because for a corrective action to exist, the issue should have happened. And we do preventive actions where we preempt an issue that can happen, and then we put up necessary mitigations around them. So please keep in mind, this is very, very important for overall improvement perspective, to understand what are corrective action, to understand what is preventive action, to document them in the right manner, to maintain the records, to ensure that the corrective and preventive action that you might have defined are effectively kept. We monitor the implementation of corrective and preventive action to ensure that they are effective. If they are not, we again go back to the drawing board, do our root cause analysis, identify other potential root causes, and make necessary changes to the process where needed. With this, we come to an end of our ISO 13485 requirements. Let's try to understand what are the different advantages of implementing ISO 13485. I, as an organization, why should I adopt the requirements of ISO 13485? So as we have been talking about this in our previous slides, it's a process-driven approach. It reduces dependency on people. It builds credibility for an organization, increases customer satisfaction. It reduces the overall operational cost, reduces time to get regulatory approval and your entry to the market, to different markets. It's a proven commitment to quality through an internationally recognized standard, adds transparency to the system. These are the few key advantages for an organization to implement ISO 13485. With this, I would like to thank you guys for being with me. If there are any questions related to this, please feel free to reach out to me. Thank you.